Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to Total War Attila, the sort of latest entry into the series that's intended to be an entirely new setting and period and therefore a new game. We'll see how that ultimately holds up. It has a lot of superficial similarities to Rome 2, but it also has quite a few significant differences, so we're gonna jump into this a little bit. So, looking at this, we've got the prologue. That's mostly a tutorial, we're gonna ignore that, but let's look at the grand campaign. It has the factions here. So, starting off, you'll notice it's clustered into these new different cultural groups. And these are a little bit like they were in Rome 2. So that hasn't really changed, but it makes a lot of sense here in this particular case. Starting off, we've got the Franks, who are the sort of early French, I suppose, in a certain sense, as well as the Saxons, who are the early English. As you can see, that they don't inhabit England at all, but there's a reason that English are called Anglo-Saxons. So these two factions represent the most normal of the factions in this game. They start off with a small series of provinces or cities. They've got a lot of room to expand. They have a minimal economy. They've got minimal costs. They've got lots of opportunities. They've got lots of weak neighbors. So they've got plenty that they have going for them. But yeah, they're surrounded by a lot of different unique factions that are a lot varied compared to what they would normally have to face in any other Total War game, which is the biggest difference. Now, these guys have a lot of ability to damage and raid the Saxons here, which makes that it common for them to just burn down things quite often instead of actually taking them for their own, especially because they've got these new kingdoms ability, which their building conversion rate's minus 50%. I'm not really sure what that actually ultimately results in, but I have been trying to figure that out. The Franks have that as well. I think it's supposed to be positive, so, but I'm really not sure what the minus 50% means in that context. I haven't been able to figure that out through testing. But they've got 50% casualty, or sorry, ferocious warriors, so they get integrity minus 50% penalty from casualties suffered. And they've got melee damage plus 10% for every 25% casualties suffered by a unit. So in other words, these guys can take a lot of casualties and keep going, a lot better than other people can. These are the Great Migrators. These are the people who were displaced by the attacks of Attila the Hun to the large extent and were pushed sort of westward into Rome. So that really fits what the Ostrogoths are. They were allowed, if I recall correctly, to settle into the borders of the Roman Empire, but I cannot remember that for sure. I'm honestly going to say, this is not my favorite period of history, and I do not know a ton of stuff about this. But yeah, the Ostrogoths, if I recall, were relatively okay. Yeah, inheritors of Rome, no instability when occupying settlements from Roman factions. Can recruit Roman units and settlements with Roman military buildings. Don't know what that really means there. Their religion is Arian Christian, which is basically the Germanic Christian nations here. We've got the Alans. These guys, sort of the... if you remember Rome 2 Total War, there were those series of horsemen provinces that came out in that DLC. These are one of them, essentially. They've got the Sarmatian horsemanship, and you can see that that's sort of where that continues on. They get more casualty bonuses and so on and so forth, so they're quite good at that particular aspect. You've got the Vandals here, again, Arian Christian. These people were people who sacked a lot of cities as well. I do believe that that is why they are called that. But don't quote me on that. These guys I know very, very little about. They've got better boats, and they're better at raiding and sacking, so I'd imagine that that is why that... I'm pretty sure that's where the word Vandal comes from. But, again, not my favorite period of history. Now, the Visigoths are the ones that I do know a little bit about, because Alaric actually sacked Rome. And they're another Germanic group that was pushed west. He tried very hard to get his the Romans to agree to let him settle in the Roman borders, where they would be safe from the Huns, but instead they ended up sacking Rome, taking their treasures. Interesting time. At this point in time, the capital of Rome is not in Rome, ironically, so that didn't matter as much, but frankly, Rome was screwed anyway. And these guys have blood money, plus 10%, plus 10 food when migrating through Roman territory, plus 500 from the formation of tributary states, so very good at forcing states to become their bitch, basically, and also good at wandering through Rome. Not that interesting, other than the fact that they are going to have a lot of incentive to move through Rome and probably sack it. Okay, so these are the titular guys here, the Huns. They've got Uldin as their faction leader. Now, I think most of you guys know who Attila the Hun is, to the most part. He was, you know, the guy who swept through Europe, causing a lot of the problems. There weren't really any organized armies at the time to really put him down in his place, and the ones that did have that army, for the most part, didn't want to fight him. That would have been Constantinople. They decided instead to let him migrate westward, keeping their own borders safe at the expense of pretty much everybody else. But yeah, he's got the Scourge of God, so all those Christian factions, so all their great migrators, and if I recall... No, those are both Germanic pagans. Okay, so you got a huge morale penalty when you're fighting him if you're playing a Christian nation, which is pretty effective. Like, it's a huge bonus. Down from there, they've got Horsemen of the Apocalypse. They get more growth when they raise settlements. So in other words, they basically take the population with them when they raise a settlement. They get +1 integrity for every war being persecuted. So they benefit from being in lots of wars at a time. They get +20 food consumption in provinces where the Horde is present. So that is basically they eat out all the food from whoever is there. And it's not their food, so they don't have to worry about it. And then they've got... Where they're there, enemies can't reinforce their armies. So this makes it easy to take out a very small nation because they won't be able to increase the army size. So just have to have your armies, your hordes spread throughout their nation, and they won't be able to reinforce it all. So these guys are quite interesting, quite effective. Their inability to actually take land is one of their only detriments, and I think that it's hard to say how that's going to play out in the end. Moving on to the Roman Empire. You got the Eastern Roman Empire here, and this is actually the stronger of the two at this point in history. Constantinople is their main hub of commerce, their capital, religion, and it is where you could argue that Rome still exists. Rome lives in Constantinople and in the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. And they're an economic powerhouse here. They get way more money from trade, and they get way more income than other people. Well, 5%, but that is actually quite significant. And they've also got this imperial allegiance. So anytime they cause another nation of barbarians, as they call them, to become one of their vassals, one of their tributary states, they will actually get to recruit units from them and get that unit diversity that way. Interesting start, very powerful faction. It's still very hard because they're vastly overstretched. Africa in particular is very difficult to hold. And you've got a lot of powerful enemies at your borders, so there is that. Moving on, we've got the Western Roman Empire. As you can see, they've got a huge amount of territory here. They've got cultural integration as their primary goal, or sorry, their primary attribute here. They pay less upkeep for non-Romans. They have constant immigration, and they get less public order penalties for having immigration. So their population increases quite constantly. Usually it's Germanic barbarians and stuff like that that move into their border, and that was what was happening in history. And they've also got the Imperial Allegiance, and they can also get those friendly hordes to give them that. So I think most of you know who the Romans were, and I think you know that this is sort of the Western Roman Empire just before it collapses. And lastly, you've got the Eastern Roman Empires with the Sassanids, and these guys are actually just about entering their golden age. They're being repressed a little bit by the Huns, but they're just at the cusp of the golden age of that region. And because of this, they're actually quite advanced. They've got a lot of money from their tribute or puppet states, of which they start with quite a few. And they're allowed to levy a lot of units from each of those different puppet states. So these guys are actually quite strong. They're in a secure position. They don't have a whole lot of enemies. And this is why they're actually set as initially challenging as easy. The only one that really is different from what is normal here is the Western Roman Empire. They actually start with an initial challenge of Legendary, which I don't think I've seen it. I've probably seen it in a game before, but I don't remember it. The Huns, hard because they don't have their own land. I think that's why. Ostrogoths, they're normal, hard for the Vandals, or sorry, the Alans, very hard for the Vandals, and the Visigoths are also easy. They start off with far more army, they don't start with near anything too imposing, so that becomes an advantage for them. The Barbarian Kingdoms are both very hard and normal, so not too sure why the Saxons are actually considered normal while the Franks are considered very hard. Although, if I recall correctly, the Saxons have a truly large army at the start of the game, so that might have something to do with it. Anyway, let's dive into a quick game here. We'll try showing you a little bit of the Huns, because this has some of those really interesting new game mechanics.
The air was filled with smoke and blood. The Huns gloried in the stench of death. They took what they needed and left their enemies to rot. The Huns were free. They rode and fought and lived. Fear built Roman walls. They were right to be afraid. And behold, a red horse, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. Those with gold offered it by the wagon. The Huns took it and allowed them to live in fear. At least, until they returned. Riders of the Four Winds prayed to him of the eternal sky. They made ready for war. Hailing from the eastern steppes, yours is a life of constant...
Okay, we're gonna ignore the guy there. So, this is one of the early interesting things about these factions and this game. So, as you can see, we've got Oldea here. This is one of the cities that we start off beside. And if we go into, you know, diplomacy, we can get these guys here. And, let's see here. There are these guys, and you can see that they are a tributary state, so they're paying us money, which is an interesting sort of way that you go about this. But if we look at ourselves, we have no cities ourselves in our starting areas. We just have tributary states that we've sort of demanded they pay us money, which is both good and bad. It means that we don't have to manage our cities or our wealth in that particular way, but we still have to build our base. So if we go to our army here, we can look at our movement options, and one of them is to encamp. So This means that our armies will set up and will stop moving in any capacity. Right now, I can still recruit units without encamping, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I can. But I can also encamp, and I can produce these buildings, and these are more like yurts or anything like that. And these are basically a series of tents or whatever. And for a series of tents, these cost a ridiculous amount of money. But what you can do here is you can get your buildings upgraded when you're encamped. And every time they pull out these tents and all this other stuff, they'll have these ability to upgrade these things and advance your economy that way. So you still have your city building elements, but you take it with your armies. So each of the armies that you get and that you build as the Huns are going to be used in that fashion. So let's take a look around the map here. We can see that our armies are somewhat spread out, but they're spread out among a friendly tributary state. So we don't necessarily want to do anything to attack him or make him feel uncomfortable or unwelcome here. What we want to do is find a group of people who, for the most part, are either aggressive to us, so that we're at war here with. We don't want to attack the Eastern Roman Empire, but we could find someone else potentially. They're all, I don't know why those guys would even be at war with us. They're way the hell away. Anyway, you can see that we're at war with the Ostrogoths, as I said, assuming I got that right. But so let's try looking at these guys. Now, these guys, it looks like we've got a non-aggression pact with, so we're not going to be able to attack them. But it looks like we can attack the Sclavenians. So it could be worthwhile forcing a tributary state from them. And let's see here, make them a tributary state. They've got a low chance of success there. So we're going to go ahead and try and turn these guys into a tributary state. And who are you guys the right ones? I can never remember the names of places in this game. It's an awful situation here. So we can also go into our recruitment thing. Economic, military, fairly simplified. I think we're going to start off by researching our civic. So we'll do that. What we're going to do, though, is move in a proper horde manner. We've got 3 fairly strong armies. And what we want to do is use these to sort of demand tribute from local peoples. So we're going to go ahead and start moving our armies northward. Let's see. Do I care about diplomatic repercussions? Not really. I'm Attila the Hun. So if we look at these guys here. Let's see who you guys are. Let's see if we can get you to... Nope. Okay, so what we want to do is try and make these guys into a tributary state. So again, we're going to start moving our army over towards there. This army, on the other hand, we're going to have you guys become a more powerful army. So we're going to have you guys encamp, and we're going to have them look through some of the buildings here. So we've got the Elders' Yurts here. These are essentially the cultural ones that these guys have access to. If we go over here, we've got a community. These are basically a money-making series of buildings. And you can see that campfires you can be used to increase that, but it's a little bit like temples for other factions. We've got goat herders. We don't particularly feel like we need that since these guys have got plenty of food. So we're not going to worry about that particular state. But let's look at this. We've got a construction site, so we've got the ability to freely pick what we want to do here. And this is based, again, on population. You get more construction sites based on the population of your town. What could make sense is a warrior's yurts, because that lets us recruit more things. Communal ground, of course. Or we could do artisans, and this starts giving us access to industry. We're going to want to get more money, and we also want more warriors. So what we could do if we really wanted both is actually start refurbishing one of our buildings into something else. So you just demolish that and it would get converted over into something else. Or we could focus on culture and commerce for our money. But if we did get the bartering grounds, what we'd end up seeing is, you know, the typical thing where we would want to get industry along with it. So you've got a lot to sort of consider here when you're doing this sort of thing. For now, I think that it would make more sense for us to take the Warriors Yurts. It'll take us a good amount of time here. You can see that it'll take at least 2 turns. Now, we could get this construction site if we had more population. As you can see, we've got 0 spare population surplus, which means we cannot do that. We do have quite a lot of population growth, though, so that is going to make it possible for us to get a new building relatively soon. So that's sort of how that works out. We're going to go ahead and look at these factions, these armies here. This one still has enough movement left to it so that I could start recruiting some more units. But I could also lay siege to the city here, and it could potentially be a good idea for me to do so. Now, you start off with this army, which consists of a lot of strong mounted bowmen. Well, actually, no, you start off with the weakest ones, but you also start off with some lancers, some skirmishing people, and some melee cavalry here. So very, very light cavalry that you start off with, but still very effective. One of the things that I can do here is... Actually, let's double-check something. Looks like they have a second... Actually, no, those are a migratory group, I think. Yeah, this is a migratory group, so I don't have to worry about them. They have a non-aggression pact to me. So these guys over here, though, they have no allies or anything like that. They just have the one province. So what we can do is probably declare war on them and get away with it. We'll accept that. And we're going to go ahead and put up some siege equipment, even though we can't really use it. Just because, why not? But also because we might bother to get some mercenaries at some point in time. So mercenaries, similar to the other games, as you can see, we've got access to these mercenary, very Hunnic-style units here. Looks like we've also got access to a mercenary onager, so that is an interesting option, especially when we're in a siege like this. However, it's much more sensible for me to wait until this army moves into reinforcement range, or to simply rely on the fact that these guys could have to sally forth and attack a lot of cavalry with fairly static troops. They've got some dramatic mounted troops, and I'm assuming that these latter 2 units are also mounted. But that is that. I'm not going to worry too much about that factor there. So if we look here, we can also see that once we're encamped, we've got a tracking happiness value. That's for the most part, as far as I can tell, actually your integrity, but I'm not positive about that. Honestly, it's been a little bit difficult for me to figure out some of the elements to the nomadic factions as far as these go. Obviously, each of your generals, therefore, though, is super important when you're playing as these guys, because you could lose your cities, essentially, by losing your armies. So it's a double whammy for losing battles. You can't afford to. Let's see here. Let's see here. No, I don't think I can figure out how to get more details about this particular settlement, honestly. This is something I should probably have looked up a little bit more. The food details for that building, 60... Okay, well, either way, not going to worry about it any further. Let's hit end turn. And we're going to find that the end turn button takes quite some time, especially when I'm running fraps. Got the Ostrogoths, who are an enemy of ours, if I do recall, camping beside one of our tributary states. Not what you want to see. The Eastern and Western Roman empires take a long turn to process their turns because they have a ton of stuff. Frankly, a fairly ridiculous amount. Not as many factions as in some of the other games, but quite a few. regardless. Let's see here. Food shortages for the Blood Riders. Let's see, who are those? Those are these guys.
How can I help?
Okay. Well, that seems to have cut into the size of our units here. We're down to now 40 per unit, which I think has something to do with those food shortages. If we look here, it's at minus 15. So what we're going to do is probably have to set our stance to raiding. Actually, no, that doesn't affect our food for some reason. I thought that did. Alright, either way, though, we're going to go ahead and march our way over towards the riders over here. Who knows, maybe there will be better food over there. We'll have to see. If not, either way, we can go ahead and encamp while we're investing here. That is perfectly fine by me. Actually, no, I just have it set to a lower unit cap for some reason. I don't remember doing that. Well, let's not worry about that too much. Either way, what the hell's going on over here? Why are you unhappy? Rivalry. Okay, so the people of this place are having some issues with one another. It's not having a huge effect on us, so we're not going to worry about that. Bit peculiar here in that we cannot seemingly raise new troops while we're besieging, which is a little bit odd for the barbarian or for the horde factions, but that is also perfectly acceptable. We're not going to worry about raising any troops right now, I don't believe, except over here because we're encamped still. So we can go ahead and we can recruit new units. All we can really get are more bows. We could try to get infantry, but this will slow down the army quite a bit. And we're going to go ahead and hit end turn again here. Now, one of the things I can do is just outright force them to become a tributary state. And if the siege holds on long enough where they feel sufficiently intimidated, they'll become a tributary state without me having to actually attack them. If that fails, I can go ahead and attack them, and we'll actually force them to become a tributary state, and they won't be able to do anything about it. Of course, it is good to get those attacks in as well, just because it gives you experience for your armies. Bastarnians, that's not a good name. You can see the effects of something over here, and that fire spreading over there means that a settlement has been completely razed to the ground. It can be rebuilt for quite considerable cost. Our ally is under attack and requires help. The Ostrogoths are essentially attacking one of the groups that has decided to pay us tribute, so that means that they're an ally state, essentially. Now, the problem here is that I'm not going to be able to get there in time, but I'll have more integrity. I'll look better on the diplomatic map if I come to the aid of them on paper. So we're going to say that we're going to come help, and then we're just going to let them die. Because we can't get there in time anyhow. That settlement is going to get sacked. And frankly, the Ostrogoths are a little bit too strong right now anyway. Okay, so you guys are still probably hungry. That is fine. We're going to try and move you guys a fairly minimal amount. And I believe that puts us into reinforcement range. Nope. Okay, well, we'll continue our siege. What we're trying to do is creep this army close enough that... Oh, there we go, the red line. Get them into reinforcement range. What we're going to hope is that we have enough movement left. Yeah, we can encamp now. And that will help us by letting us build those buildings that are going to give us more food and stuff like that. Okay, so our enemy here, they've got some siege equipment as counter siege equipment. That's a mercenary onager. But what we can do instead of actually besieging them and attacking them is go back into our diplomatic thing here, bringing up the Antians.
Gods of the afterlife,
and we can offer them a peace treaty.
Well, why do you trouble my digestion today?
And we can offer to make them a tributary state. So they're going to refuse that offer, it looks like. So we're going to have to go ahead and attack them. Now, siege battles as the Huns is not exactly their specialty. This is not like Genghis Khan or anything. But let's go ahead and attack here, I think. I don't really want to have to roll this one on manual, because it's going to be a lot of heavy skirmishing with my cavalry here. So we're going to hit auto-resolve, which is always a nice idea when you're attacking something like this. So, pretty easy. Managed to roll through that settlement garrison pretty easily. And that gave us a decisive victory. We took some losses, but nothing too serious. If we look at our reinforcing army, they lost a set amount of tribespeople. I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, we've only got two options here. We can sack the city, which is worth a lot of money. We've got minus 15 province instability, so whoever is there is going to have trouble recovering. Or we can completely burn the place to the ground, which is going to really wreck their ability to function. And we don't want to do this unless we want to really teach people a lesson. We want to cause fear, essentially, in other people when we do that. For now, we're going to sack it.
Your next command?
Let's see here. Noble enemy has fallen in battle against us. That's fine. Now, one of the interesting things is I can continue to attack this place. I can sack it again for the hell of it. But what we're going to go ahead and do is try and see if we can get an agreement from them now. The odds of it are pretty low. They're going to be pretty bitter about that whole thing.
In wasting the day on you. What you say had better please my ears.
Make you a tributary state? No? Okay, well, if that's going to be the case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to raise it. And here you can see the fire from that spreading. And this is going to increase the odds that people are going to be afraid of us in future and give in to our demands. So if we look, this is now desolate. It can actually be rebuilt by civilized factions, and that is definitely something that is worth doing if you come across one of these. It's basically a free state as far as not having to fight for it. It does cost a lot to actually do, though, so there is that to consider. We're going to go ahead and learn our warriors camp. That's going to be fine. We're going to go ahead and set up camp here with this army, which they still have room to do. And this gives us the ability to go ahead and increase our food production by getting a herder's yurts. We've already upgraded that, so this will solve that food problem that this particular group has been having. This group, on the other hand, I think that they're also ahead on food, so that's not a problem for them. They can't camp down right now. But we've got plenty of money, got lots and lots of cash, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to look for a building upgrade that we could potentially get here. Looks like we don't have anything that we can upgrade right now. But we do have those warriors yurts, so we do have access to, as you can see, more unit types. So anyhow, that's a look at how the nomadic factions work. It's quite interesting. I do like a lot of those effects. There seems to be an encampment over there of some sort. Interesting. But yeah, in any event, that's our look at the single-player campaign. It's pretty interesting. I do have to say that I really like this idea behind the nomadic factions and how they work. I'm not sure necessarily, though, how you're going to be able to use that to expand your armies and to grow as a faction. I think that that's going to be something that I have to look more into. So hopefully we'll find that that is something that works out quite well, but you never know. You never know. All right, let's go ahead with that. Now, one of the more interesting things I find is that you still make money when your guys are on the move, so that's quite interesting to me. In any event, that is our look so far at these guys. Let's take a look at the multiplayer. Okay, so going into this, we've got historical battle. These are as per usual. They're not that interesting, typically, but they're sort of set-piece battles that are famous throughout history. Not my particular cup of tea personally. There's custom battle. This is your typical place where you go to sort of figure out your army compositions. We can take time to look at some of the units here. One of the interesting things about this game as compared to Rome 2 is the compression of units. The distance between the lowest quality unit to the highest quality unit in terms of how effective they are, is a lot shortened compared to the two. So this unit of Exploradores here is quite bad, but they're still capable of fighting effectively enough. These Herculean Signores are worth the money, but they're not an invincible murder unit like the Praetorian Guards were. And this is reflected in their costs being comparatively close together. Now, there are some highly elite units out there. These units of Herculeani Signores is actually ridiculously, and I'm pronouncing that wrong, just ignore me. But their encourageability is something that's jumping up their price quite a bit here. They're not necessarily better, and in fact, it looks like they're a little bit worse in a lot of ways when compared to the Elite Palatina. So the distance between different units is actually quite subtle, and it kind of makes it interesting in that you can use any of these units and get out okay. The negative is that they don't necessarily have the greatest diversity of units in the sense, in that these all play out fairly similarly. They're relatively interchangeable with one another. So it's hard to say for sure just how effective, for example, a Cohors is compared to a Legio. They're not necessarily that far apart from one another. Now, you've also got these crossbows. This is a new addition to this game in addition to the bows and slingers. And then, of course, you've also got the skirmishers. But the crossbowmen are quite interesting. If we look here, we can look at their missile damage. It is armor-piercing 50 and base 15. If we were to compare that to a skirmisher, the skirmisher does do a little bit more damage, but it's only 20 armor-piercing. So what a crossbowman is actually really good for is tearing down heavily armored troops. These are essentially the guns of this game. They work a lot like the matchlocks did in Shogun 2. The major difference between the crossbows and the guns is that these guys don't have the same sort of missile shock value that the guns did. They just have a very high damage value. They're very good at killing armored units, heavy infantry. So they're very good for that purpose. Bows remain as they sort of were before as an intermediary. The slingers, of course, remain the best range out of all the ranged units, and the skirmishers are just very up close, very heavy, very specialized units. Only good for taking out lighter infantry, but they're very good at taking out lighter infantry. Cavalry, melee, and shock, as always. There's also a lot of factions that have other types of cavalry, so you've got the same general categories that you always had before. If we look at another faction like the Eastern Roman Empire here, you can see that pikes still exist, but there aren't as many of them. But more importantly, they've also got things like these axe units. They're actually technically Scandinavians that work for these guys, but they happen to have ridiculously high melee damage here as well, so they're quite effective. But, you know, they've got the bows, the crossbows, the skirmishers, they've got the melee cavalry, but they've also got the bow cavalry, and they've got skirmisher cavalry. So, if we go through these guys, the skirmisher cavalry and bow cavalry, sort of useful. I thought this was actually a different faction than I actually have. Okay, these are the guys that have them. Crossbow cavalry and elephants. So, they've also got naphtha throwers, which is fire bombs. Interesting unit. But basically, you've got some pretty good unit diversity and unit type diversity, and they've all got pretty interesting and diverse roles within army composition. Obviously, your access to them differs depending on which faction you happen to have, but that's sort of besides the point. And this is what you're going to be using when you're playing against a person in a quick battle. They've got the typical multiplayer lobby. We're not going to worry too much about that, but we're going to go ahead and go with a quick battle. This is sort of the standard. When you want to play a match, go ahead and use quick battle. Alright, so we're going to go... Ah, crap, it's one of the Agony guys. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pick the Saxons here. We're going to go ahead and bin this army. I'm going to go with the Chieftain here. And we're going to go with 3 units... Actually, let's go ahead and pick slightly weaker spearmen. We're going to go with 4 units of Nordic spearmen. We're going to go with a good number of the elite Nordic warriors. They're quite strong. Actually, yeah, we're going to go with a good number of these. And we're going to go with a couple of these eliter units that are going to be a sort of backbone for those. I could get some axe infantry. They're kind of interesting, but I don't particularly feel like getting any. Gonna get a couple skirmishers. And we're going to go ahead and get some shock cavalry. And I think that's about as much as I can really get here. So, we've got a fairly melee-heavy, infantry-heavy army composition here. We're going to go ahead. You can see that upgrades are a lot cheaper than they used to be. We can easily get quite a few of them. Now, we've just got a couple of these skirmishers that are going to be acting just in case he decides to camp on something. I don't particularly care if he does, but, you know... Oops, our general's set to the wrong type. Let's get that. So yeah, we're playing as a faction that happens to be quite heavy on the infantry, typically. The cavalry, not necessarily that great, that's why I'm just getting a little bit. And we're going relatively light on missiles. We're just using it to pick off any crossbows if you decide to go heavy on those. Alright, Battle of Pyrenees. This is an interesting map. Okay, so here's our battle map. I've been on here before. It's a fairly strange map. Okay, so this should be fairly familiar to most of you. Just assign your warriors into position as you normally would. We're going to go ahead and have our spears right behind our missile troops here, just as support for them. And we're going to form up our main battle line of infantry here. We're going to have these guys, our elites, forming our flanks on either side here. And we're going to have our chieftain in the center. And then, of course, the lancers that we have here, quite heavily upgraded, but quite weak. We're going to have out on our flanks, and we're going to have them just hunt missile troops for the most part. Yeah, I don't like these agony guys. They're actually quite good at this game, typically. Let's see here. Yeah, he's gone for a very heavy melee infantry build here. But Eastern Armored Legio, yeah, not necessarily the strongest of the types there. So infantry spam is quite strong still in this game. Cannot lie about that. And he is rushing up that cavalry, something fierce. So what we're going to do is just have our spears move up. Our slings should be ready to fire pretty soon.
It's an ambush.
Not sure what kind of heavy melee cav. So one of the things that's interesting here is that I've got complete missile dominance, even though I've only got a little bit of missile troops. But we'll have to see how that works out, because I have only got a little bit of slingers, after all. Now, I think these missile units, or these cavalry over here have some missile units in them. And of course we're freezing here, which is unfortunate. Now we can tell that both of our slingers are firing, it looks like. Our ambush troops? Did I take ambush troops? Uh-oh. Did not really intend to take ambush troops, but, you know, happens.
We have revealed their concealed men.
Okay, so we're going to try and get our general...
Our general is being attacked. Keep him alive.
going to move these guys back here. We should actually be able to punch through in a couple places here. Might be able. Oh yeah, looks like we can actually get into these guys here. One of the things we can do with our general over here, rally up these guys.
This is a shameful display.
And they'll probably get these spears back into the fight, which is good because I can use them then.
The enemy refuses to admit defeat. Their unit has rallied.
Alright, let's rally up here. And we're going to use these guys up in this cavalry fight.
The men have thrown down their weapons and are fleeing.
Oh, my cav has broken, which I'm not that surprised about. There we go. So we are probably going to lose this battle, but that's not too surprising here. Alright, let's use Frenzy there. That'll keep that unit in the fight a little bit longer. There we go. Can use these skirmishers just as a means to kill a couple of their guys there. Let's use steady on the general there.
We are losing our advantage.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, so this is definitely going to be a loss. One of the things I'm interested about is how he managed to afford so many tier 2 heavy infantry. Which is quite expensive. My general is going to get killed here, but he should take a while before he is.
The men have thrown down their weapons and are fleeing.
Let's see here. Oh yeah, I think I'm actually completely screwed here, but this is a pretty good example of what the multiplayer is like. Would have been actually a good time if I had used a faction that had crossbowmen. It would have been a good time to use them. Yeah. And, that's sort of the thing, though, is it's a little bit tricky to figure out the composition that you're going to ideally want at any given time, but that is perfectly fine. I actually probably should have used Shield Wall here. It's a rare time to use it, but it's quite a good ability. Alright.
The men are running! Stand and fight, damn you! The enemy has killed our general. The men lose heart.
Oh, I think I have lost here. I don't know what's freezing for otherwise. Okay, good. I would absolutely hate it if I... Okay, good, yeah. No, drop hacking is a major concern in Total War games, so if that was happening and yeah, there we go. Alright, so I did lose that, which is a shame, but, you know... Yeah, I'm not sure how he managed to afford so many of those heavy swordsmen. Because these guys are actually quite expensive, as are the Tagmata cavalry. But, in any event, yeah, that's a quick look at our sort of typical battle in Custom. As you can see, it comes in sort of one size. It's this sort of mid-range economy, I think. But it's pretty interesting. I don't know if there's a whole lot of variety. I've noticed the maps so far seem a lot flatter than they were in Rome 2, which is good, because the maps in Rome 2 involved a lot of hill camping, which I really don't like personally. You know, so it's good that they're a little bit flatter. Does mean that you're going to end up with a lot more sort of fights with less interesting terrain to go with, but you know what, that's perfectly fine under certain circumstances. Just let that happen. But yeah, anyway, I hope you found this enjoyable. I'm going to continue playing this game and try and figure out how to play the campaign Legendary Romans on Legendary. And yeah, I hope you found this enjoyable.